Hey, what's up, BookTube? It's David from Live Forever or Die Trying, and today I have my February reading wrap up for you. February went good overall. I finished off 8 books, which it's fun to think about that pace, almost 2 a week. If I was able to keep up this pace, that'd be 104 books a year, which is kind of absurd in my opinion. To be honest, this month I was helped along because all of the books are like super solid, as well as I peppered in 3 or 4 audiobooks in the mix, which when I have time on the road going and coming from work, I listen to those on 1.5 speed, and it just, allows me to power through and get those numbers up, baby. But real talk, I'm not going to keep this pace for the rest of the year. We're already seeing optimism for the wedding industry. If you don't know, that's the industry I work within. So we're seeing more and more business that is regaining confidence for the latter half of the year, which means it's going to be really busy. And that's really good, economically, of course, but that's going to mean less time to read books. And we're definitely not going to keep this 2-book-a-week pace going. I'm definitely going to try to hit 1 book a week, and I now feel like my place or my habit or pace is in a really good place right now. Whereas last year I was kind of reading in spurts, this year I'm a lot more consistent and on top of the game. This is also a very interesting month for me because it's one of the first months that I started working with publishers quite a bit. So I have a few NetGalleys, which, if you're not familiar, is like a website you go onto, and if you are some type of media in the book world, whether that is a publisher or a reviewer, or you just have a bunch of friends on Goodreads, or you do YouTube videos, or have an Instagram about books, you can sign up or request advanced reader copies. They'll send you the book, and then you just write a honest review. And they use this review as feedback to update covers, to see if things inside the book need to be changed, but also for publicity, obviously. So I was fortunate to be able to work with MIT Press, Hatchet Go, as well as Doubleday Books, I believe. But I'll cover all of those here. It turns out all the books I ended up getting were super solid, so I'm thankful I haven't had to talk shit about any of them because that'd be an awkward situation, but nonetheless I care about authenticity more than that. But enough chitter chatter, let's jump into the reviews. So the first book I actually have is from MIT Press. Again, this one was sent to me. It is Ketamine by Bita Magadam, and you saw me mention this in my TBR, I believe. So this is from their Essential Knowledge series, and this is kind of reminds me of what Oxford's very short introduction series is. But to be honest, I've only read 1 or 2 VSIs, and none of them were kind of as good or as engaging as this book here. So the VSIs were kind of hit and miss for me, to be completely honest, versus I now have a few of these, MIT books here. And so far, all 3 are genuinely hits. But ketamine specifically, we're not talking about the recreational aspect of the drug here. We're mainly looking at its pharmacology and its work as a antidepressant. So what Bita Makadam does here is she goes through kind of like a history of the drug, how it came to be what it is. So there's a lot of really interesting history about how this molecule actually comes from PCP and other dissociatives, and it was used as a combat anesthetic. And she talks about the history and kind of sets us up to explain why this is a good anesthetic and why we used it for combat and in different situations. But she does that kind of science history to then move into a pharmacology of how it's being used as an antidepressant. What I especially like is it doesn't necessarily sing the praises of the molecule, but it also doesn't just shame it for being a dirty drug, right? Which it is a dirty drug, but for different reasons. Pharmacologically, it hits a lot of different receptors, and Beta talks about that here. What I really liked about this book is it just has a lot of plain text. It's not jargon heavy, and it explains things really well. So I've read a lot about biology and different sciences and other drug books as well. But there was a description of just how receptors work in the brain, dopamine, serotonin, noradrenaline, what have you, that was just the clearest description I've ever heard. And I've heard other descriptions quite often, but this one genuinely changed, it felt like it changed a fundamental understanding of mine within this book. And it's fairly short. It comes in at a little over 180 pages with sources. And it's laid out. The big bold points are, on their own little pages. So really, you only have about 100 pages in this book to read. So pro tip, if you're trying to read a book a week or 2 books a week, 3 of these could even be one of your bigger books if you're trying to cheat your own system and not trying to establish a habit, But anyways, all in all, this was a super solid read. It's the reason I requested other books in this series. And yeah, if you're interested in the pharmacology of the drug or just what it's currently being tested for as an antidepressant, I highly recommend it. The second book I have is Jesus Interrupted. You heard me talk quite a bit about this in the last TBR, which I'll put up here, so I won't spend too much time on it here because it's I don't want to say a touchy subject because I'm not afraid of speaking on touchy subjects. I mean, I just reviewed a book on drugs, but it's a little bit out of my realm. I don't have a good foundational understanding of it. But let's back up. So this book, what he does is he compares the stories in the first 4 books. I believe the first 3 are synoptic. John, Jacob, Jingleheimer, Smith. Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John all tell very similar stories, but they're written by different people who lived at different times that were not the actual apostles. Their stories from the apostles were passed down, and then these writers wrote these books in different languages and different geography, but all tell a similar story. However, similar is the operative word there. They all contain very important differences, and the different writers try to align the story of Jesus with different prophecies by different means. So for example, like in one of the crucifixion stories, Jesus talks on the way up to the hill carrying the cross. And then when he's crucified, the curtain in the temple rips as he dies, symbolizing God being released into the world. However, in another story, he does not talk. He's very solemn. He says, "God, why have you forsaken me?" on the cross. And then before he dies, the curtain in the temple rips. So one of these stories has to be wrong, but that's not the point of this book. He's not trying to convince you the Bible's wrong. Like, this is a trained theologian. Like, he doesn't care about that outcome. He's into it for the study of what these authors were trying to portray. So it's a deep dive into the symbolism of what these little differences mean, and it goes into the history of what Israel and Christianity and Jewish culture were at the time. It analyzes Hebrew and Greek words to get a fuller understanding of what the Bible actually is. And all in all, I think whether you're a Christian or a non-believer or a heretic, it's a good book to read because it's going to bolster your knowledge on, one of the most referenced books, in Western civilization. So all in all, I definitely recommend it. I thought it was very intriguing, even though I'm not completely bought in, if you know what I mean. I'm still very skeptical, but I think it's important information. But yeah, like Christian or not, I would recommend this book. It's a solid read, 4 out of 5 easy. Next up, we had another audiobook, which was Life 3.0. Now, Life 3.0, I see on quite a few people's list, so it's very popular, and it reads like a popular nonfiction book. So the actual topic that it's talking about is artificial general intelligence, or superintelligence, kind of what Nick Bostrom would call superintelligence, rather. Now, what this book does is try to popify, the strict scholarly philosophical work. It tries to pop it up and make it not so boring. So what he does is he starts the book by talking about, this hypothetical situation. These people, develop this AI. They put it in this little container or virtual system so it can't escape, and then they get it to run these Amazon cloud service technologies to maximize income. Then it starts making games, learning human language, writing movies, blah, blah, blah. They become millionaires. Then they start pulling political strings and setting up shell corporations, and they take over the world. So he props this up in the beginning of the book as a potential scenario that we should kind of be on the lookout for. And it kind of sounds like a utopia, but if you think about it, he gives all the power to this one set of inventors. And that's almost like a warning in this book. So throughout the book, he talks about AI ethics, if AIs can have consciousness and feelings, what rights should we give them? He talks about 12 or so different scenarios, You have the enslaved God scenario where you have the super intelligence and you keep it in a box. Then you have multiple breakout scenarios. You have helpful AI scenarios. And it just kind of runs the gambit about what we should look out for, and talks about, extraterrestrial life, and, if AI exists, this is how it would proliferate through the universe. And it's just, it covers such a large breadth of AI. It almost feels like a science fiction book, which I guess, this is science fiction right now that we're debating if it comes to reality. But nonetheless, it is very interesting if you have that initial interest in AI. If you are skeptical about general AI intelligence, I think you're going to hate this book, because it has so much conjecture and speculation that you just you're going to sit there and read and be like, none of this is real information. Why am I wasting my time on it? So all in all, it's a 3 out of 5 or 5 out of 5 star book for me. Originally, I actually did rate it a 5 out of 5 on Goodreads, but the more I think about it, the more kind of caveats I have when I tell other people about it. So because of that, I've been slowly chipping away stars. Not that I did not enjoy it personally. Then book number 4, back to paperback, we have Eating Animals by Jonathan Safran Foer. And this was a really solid book. So obviously it's about, human consumption of animals. And what this book really focuses on is a lot of the moral premise behind it. And it's a lot of stuff you already know, like animals suffer when they're being, slaughtered. Chickens are kept in coops and it's very bad conditions. So if you're looking for extra cognitive dissonance to make sure you don't eat animals, reading about the horrors or the atrocities will make it harder to eat meat. Like your next meal you sit down and eat at the restaurant, you're going to be a little less likely to eat that animal. So if you are looking for that specifically, this book will do a bit of that. However, this is a very balanced book. So instead of something that is very propaganda driven, or I would equate to something like Cowspiracy on Netflix, this isn't singularly minded. So what he does is he talks about, his background and how some people don't have the choice of what to eat. He mentions his grandmother that survived the Holocaust. But even though she would eat some meat, she would stay away from stuff that wasn't kosher, and how ingrained eating meat is in our culture. He talks about Thanksgiving and what that means, and the commercialization of meat, the history of factory farming. And it's very well-rounded history of how we got to where we are, and the current welfare of the animals that exist within the system. What I thought was very interesting is he provides a combination of journalistic writing with memoir with history, and kind of melds that together, which is a very nice, pleasant book to read. Also, in between the chapters, he has these kind of little thematic pages, which personally I thought were very enjoyable and just make it for a good reading experience. He also puts other people's point of view in this book. So he talks about members of PETA and what they believe in, and their radical position. But he also puts in the small local farmer and gets you to sympathize with them. It's hard to think of this simple farmer that can't feed his family if he does not factory farm. Now, is that an excuse for trading the animals the way he does? That's a different topic. But he props up these stories to get you thinking about it. One of my biggest takeaways was that he kind of ranked animal suffering, and he said, if you're eating fish, every fish you have ever eaten has suffered the most. They either get drug in nets until they suffocate, or they're put in these little ponds on factory farms where they have sea lice and they're constantly living a terrible life. Then he goes on to say, most poultry is treated terribly, 95% of it. He goes on to say, pork is treated pretty badly, but 85% of them have terrible lives. And then beef, 70% of cattle, have terrible lives. So if you're eating meat, eat beef, pork, poultry, then fish last. So it kind of quantifies the majority of the suffering. Now, there's a lot of arguments you could bring up, is a fish suffering the same as a pig who's more emotionally intelligent? It doesn't have that many pages to talk about all of this, but this is a good jumping off point to figure out which topics within the realm of eating animals you would like to discuss further. My only real complaint is I feel like if the author is obviously disturbed by the meat industry. However, if he wants to convert people to not eat meat, I feel like the moral argument is weaker against other arguments. Not to say it is a weak argument, but is weaker in comparison to. So, for example, you could look at the chapter about the trawling, the fish farming, and you get 95% additional overkill on other animals, sea turtles, stingrays, whales, dolphins, that, you're just trying to, sweep up flounder, but you're destroying coral reefs at the same time. That is a whole topic for a book in and of itself. And you don't even have to touch global warming. You can just touch on, ecosystem collapse. And I feel like that could have been a whole book, whereas if you're just trying to appeal to somebody's, morality, I could be a speciesist and say, a pig's experience is not the same as a human. They might not be able to form memories as well, so therefore their suffering is not as much. Not that I personally believe that, but other people do, and you cannot invalidate that argument. We don't have the science to prove, we don't have the capabilities, as a human, to understand how bad that experience truly is. You can, check receptors and, stress, cortisol levels in their blood and whatnot, but you don't know what that really feels like within their circuitry. So yeah, overall, I thought it was a really good book. I rated it 5 out of 5, but for somebody who doesn't have my set of interest, it's probably a solid 4 out of 5 for just anybody. Then we had another book I was sent for review, which was Drink by David Nutt. So David Nutt is a neuropsychopharmacologist. Can't even use that on a Scrabble word. And he actually owns a wine bar as well as informs on policy about, drugs. Whether that's alcohol, heroin, MDMA, or otherwise. So in this book, it's a deep dive about what alcohol does in the brain, but it also talks about some of the cultural aspects as well. So what I found was very interesting about this book is that there's no amount of alcohol that you can drink without net negative impact. He does tell you, there is cultural benefit, obviously, but he's even the studies on resveratrol and sirtuins, from David Sinclair, that is objectively a good thing that is in red wine, for example. And it has been shown that 1 or 2 drinks a day has been cardiovascular or cardioprotective, protective of your cardiovascular system. But he says this is the implication of this molecule on 200 other diseases. And just because it protects your heart a little bit, and it might be good for aging, overall this is going to mess you up in one of these other ways that is arguably a worse negative than the potential benefit. And he says that as an owner of a wine bar. So this isn't a doom and gloom book. He's not you're not going to read this book and just hear what in your opinion is going to be propaganda. It feels very balanced and level-headed. My only complaint about this book, which is not necessarily a complaint, it's just not particularly applicable to me, is the last fifth of the book talks about addiction. So it shows you signs of friends or family members' addiction of alcohol and what you should do in those scenarios. So that's very important, and I give the book props for that. But to be completely honest, total transparency, I basically skipped the last fifth of this book. Well, I didn't skip, I skimmed it to figure out which sections were going to be enjoyable to me. All in all, 4 out of 5 book for anyone, 5 out of 5 for me. Next up on audiobook again, we had How Democracies Die by Stephen Levinsky. And this, I believe Stephen is from Harvard. And similar to the Jesus book, I'm not going to touch terribly deep on this one because I simply don't know the intricacies the book was speaking on quite as well as I would like to make additional commentary over what the book is about itself. So, this book is an analysis about how democracies die when they do not die because of military or coups. So this is internal revolutions, weakening of infrastructure, how propaganda works, and basically he uses this as a warning sign to show us what was happening under Trump. And whether you are pro-Trump or anti-Trump, I feel like this is a good book to read still. If you are pro-Trump, this book is gonna, make you upset a little bit because he does pick on him a little bit. But he picks on him in a way that I think is fair. And what I mean by that is he says one of the most critical things about How Democracies Die is polarization and breaking of norms. And even if you voted for Trump, you know that he was anti-establishment. He wanted to change the way the system worked right now. And you can't really argue, he definitely did that. But he did it in a way where he did not observe certain unspoken rules. And Levinsky in this book, what he does is he shows how that crack in the foundation can evolve, and how other people in history have taken that and led to a polarized civilization that has eventually collapsed in on itself or was toppled from the top down. So I do think it's a very interesting book. And I especially like the commentary, like the mixture of history with political theory with relation to current events. I do think it's going to age the book eventually, but we'll have to wait and see. Then we had Ageless by Andrew Steele, and I read this from NetGalley on my ebook, which is somewhere around. Small tangent, I abhor the ebook reading experience. I have learned that not only because it looks prettier on my Instagram, but I like the tactile sensation of books. I like audiobooks as well, but for the convenience. If I'm going to sit down and hold something in my hands, I want it to be paperback now. But that's neither here nor there. Ageless was a fantastic book. So you know I'm a fanboy of longevity and ending aging. And you also know certain books like The Longevity Diet and The Ageless Generation, I haven't been afraid necessarily to give low ratings to, like 2 out of 5, 3 out of 5. So when I say that this book was truly a fantastic 5 out of 5 book, know that I'm not saying that because I like the subject and I want to proselytize the research. This was genuinely the best deep dive onto the science of longevity research for the average reader. So you have books like David Sinclair's Lifespan, where he talks about a little bit of philosophy and tries to, get you into the mood to end aging, gives you a little bit of his research, gives you a little bit about the future, and then, that's the end of the book. It's like piecemeal together a lot of little interesting stories. And then you have books about philosophy of aging, societal problems and what have you. This book does only one thing, which is it talks about the current science, but it does it in such a clear languaged way that it takes these complex topics like epigenetics and information theory and just makes them so simple for the average reader to just understand that I think this may be one of the most important books on aging research that we've had, because the biggest thing about aging research is most people still think it's science fiction, and I don't blame you for that. But on the same level, the human body should not be treated any different from a car. If you can understand all of its components, you can understand how to repair those components and keep it going. We need to understand that evolution did not, it has no incentive to extend a lifespan. So we have these imperfect forms that, can be improved through science. And you need to understand the science to understand it's not science fiction. So I think this book may be one of the most important books for the actual movement as a whole. And yeah, it's just fantastic, and I pretty much recommend it to anybody. It's just clear language, jargon-free, but you're going to walk away with it with a better understanding of yourself as well as human biology. And then, last but not least, Extraterrestrials, again, the MIT Press Essential Knowledge series. So you may be like me. When I saw this book, I'm like, okay, I have to get it to see if it's bullshit or not, right? You're going to tell me MIT's writing a book about essential knowledge and has an alien on the cover. So, are we going to learn the history of Roswell or what? But it kind of threw a curveball at me, and I appreciate it for it. It was not what I was expecting at all, but in a good way. So it's actually more about the search for extraterrestrials as well as a philosophy of life in general in outer space and what it takes to form life. So what do I mean by that? So it goes over a history of SETI first, which is the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. And it goes through a history about how this field started and then how it developed and then the technologies that we use within it. So looking at radio frequencies around the hydrogen flip line, which is a super interesting concept, talks about what type of language or encoding process potential aliens might use. Talks about our Voyager space probes where we've sent out into space, and just a myriad ways that we've used to search for life and why we chose those and what might be wrong with those. So that's the first half of the book, which is super interesting, but if I'm being completely honest, did have its moments where you can only make radio frequency technology so interesting. By about the third page of you reading about different radio frequencies, you're gonna lose anybody But, you know, they did the best they could here. So there's a few sections of this book that were independently 3 or 4 out of 5 stars for me. But within the encasement of the full package, it's still like a 4 out of 5 or solid 5 out of 5 read. The second part, which was beyond phenomenally interesting for me, was the actual philosophy or future speculation about where can we find life. So it kind of shows you a little bit of look under the hood of what constitutes the Fermi paradox, and then gives you these algorithmic, like, logic lines of thinking about, you know, how many planets should we expect there to be life on. So it says, you know, if we have this many planets in our galaxy and they need to be in this temperature range, as set by the knowledge we know about extremophiles on Earth, and they need to have these molecules because of these reasons, and, you know, blah, 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 down the line, here's all the factors, you know, we can expect 30,000 planets or whatever to have life. Okay, now why don't they? Then we talk about great filters. Maybe they all kill themselves, like with nukes or technology when they get to a certain point. Or maybe, you know, intelligent life is extremely hard to develop. You know, human beings were 70,000 years old. Dinosaurs were here a lot longer than we were. None of them ever developed spacecraft, and that's maybe just because evolution does not optimize for that. Intelligence might not be a good evolutionary tool, or what have you. And then it talks about the other scenarios, like in the universe, like, are we the only one? Is it possible that we're the first on this timeline, and there may be a statistical probability and no great filters that there isn't more aliens down the line, and we're just the first? And again, short book, clear and concise, and just a fantastic introduction to the topic with a big bibliography in the end if you want to read more. And yeah, that's pretty much my February. So all in all, we had a super diverse reading month. Books on drugs, books on eating things, books on aliens, books on Jesus, books on the government. Quite a wide range within nonfiction. If you had a favorite topic or favorite book from this little wrap-up, make sure to leave those in the comments below. As always, not only does it give me a nice little dopamine rush, but it does help the channel along the algorithm. And if you do want to double down on that dopamine rush, you know, you can buy a book from the Amazon link. But in all seriousness, if you are going to take the effort to buy a book because of this video, I always recommend using Amazon Smile or buying local if possible. Even though I do get a little bit out of those affiliate links. I think I made $6 so far in the 3 months I've been running them, so you guys are killing it for me out there. You know, you bought me a book, at least a used one. But anyways, feel free to like and subscribe. I look forward to seeing you guys in the next one.